Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crypto Agility Insights. My name is Ian Curry. I'm the Chief Business Officer at InfoSec Global. And today we're diving into the really interesting world of hardware security modules, which are also known as HSMs in the industry, with a true industry expert. Joining us today is Nils Gerhardt, and Nils is the Chief Technology Officer at Utimaco. And Utimaco is a leading provider of HSMs and overall cybersecurity solutions and is a highly valued partner of InfoSec Global. Welcome, Nils. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's really a pleasure to be here and to discuss on hardware security modules. But I can tell you, we will also touch a lot of other tech topics and tech trends, from confidential computing to regulated cryptocurrencies. I'm really looking forward to an exciting talk.
Fantastic. Could you just start off by giving us a little bit more background on yourself and what you do at Utimaco?
Sure, absolutely. Let's start with myself. My name is Nils Gerhardt. I'm the CTO of Utimaco, and I've been in the industry for a good part of 20 years in different roles, overseeing R&D as well as product management, project management, and in parts of my career also solution sales, because that is important to understand from the customers how you actually bring products together.
Yeah, fantastic. And just to make sure that everybody who's listening has a good background on Utimaco, could you tell us the history of the company and some interesting facts that you know about Utimaco?
Utimaco is a global leader in cybersecurity. We actually have offices around the world, and I like to use a picture to explain what Utimaco is doing. So imagine a smart city. And in a smart city, you have a lot of digitalization going on. You have high-speed internet with 5G, for instance. You have fintechs kind of reinventing the way you pay. The cloud plays an important role. You have other things like self-driving cars. And there's one thing that all these cases have in common. They need to have a trusted root so that these digitalization cases can actually be secured for all the citizens. And that's exactly what Utimaco is doing for more than 40 years. This is providing the hardware security modules at a root of trust for all the digitalization that's happening in such a smart city.
Okay, perfect. And by root of trust, you just mean sort of the thing that everything else depends on above that.
Absolutely.
Is that a good way of thinking about that?
It is, in fact, the secure storage for the key material that you need to protect the integrity of the data, encrypt the data, the confidentiality, and do authentication in a secure way. And in fact, the interesting thing about Utimaco is we are actually serving a lot of different industries, the telecommunication industry, as well as banks and governments, OEMs. So a lot of customers come from very different segments. And there's a good chance that even you, Ian, you have actually something from us in use. So you may not know that, but when you use your mobile phone in the morning and it connects to the network, some of that authentication may be Utimaco technology. Or you be at a retailer, you use your card, your credit card, your debit card, that transaction may be secured by Utimaco. So there's a very good chance that a lot of our listeners here are actually using Utimaco technology without knowing.
Yeah, super cool. So a very broad footprint across industries and across different uses of technology.
Yes.
That's fantastic. So can you just take a few minutes and explain what hardware security modules do, why they're so critically important to cybersecurity overall?
Yes, I'm very happy to do that. I mean, for me, hardware security modules are actually very cool tech. It's a system. It's a mix of hardware, software, and of course, you can also consume that as a service if you like. And it provides an extra level of security. It is actually so sophisticated that when you actually take a device that is certified and goes against the highest level of security, that it has an active tamper response. So if you try to break into such device that stores your crown jewels, your keys, what you need to protect all of your enterprise, then that device will detect that attack and will delete the key material to make sure all your use cases that you use that key material for is still secure. So let's take an example, Ian. I think that may be easier to understand. Most companies in the world run a PKI. A PKI is really fundamental to all the security in the industry. And when you actually set up a PKI, you have a root CA, a certification authority that you actually set up to build out your PKI systems. And when you actually do that, then you actually create key material. And that key material that you are creating needs to be protected. And that is actually when an HSM comes into the play. You store that key material in the HSM, and there actually it is very well protected, so nobody can actually get access to it. And that is actually one of the use cases HSMs are used for. And I'm giving you a couple of more exciting use cases while we discuss the topic.
Fantastic. So you talked about HSMs being tamper-proof, that if tampering is detected, they'll basically shut down and delete the key material. What are some of the other unique aspects and advantages of HSMs?
HSMs are very good in doing cryptography. Cryptography needs power, needs processing power, just to accelerate the speed of how calculations are being done. And that is actually something that the HSM brings naturally with it. Also, HSMs are having usually certifications because a lot of our customers needed also to be compliant in terms of regulatory frameworks. And those HSMs come with certifications for the payment industry, like PCI. They also come with other certifications, including FIPS and common criteria. So this is another unique feature of an HSM. So it really proves the security of the device itself. And when we go a little bit more into the devices that Utimaco is providing, because that actually is pretty unique, you also see that some of the technologies that we know from clouds, like virtualization, is, for instance, used within the HSM, just to make sure that we actually go with time and use actually new technologies to make sure we have multi-tenants that are residing on an HSM, and also different functionalities that an HSM can support. I can give you another really simple use case. Just imagine you want to choose your lottery numbers, and you do that online. And so you choose the numbers, and at that point, you need to prove that that lottery ticket is existing, so that you didn't actually fill in the numbers after they have been drawn, right? So that is a very easy case. It looks easy, it looks simple, but it's in fact not. So you need a timestamp. So you need to prove that that ticket existed at a certain time, and a digital signature to make sure there is no fraud ongoing here. And these things actually use cases where an HSM plays a role again.
Okay, you gave some super interesting examples there. Can you just talk a little bit about how HSMs deal with cryptographic keys, or maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot?
Yeah, I mean, in general, you have very different cryptographic methods. You have what we know as asymmetric cryptography. One of the most prominent example is RSA as an algorithm. You have a private key and you have a public key. And the private key is the key that you really need to protect. The public key is publicly known, and within a certificate, you can actually prove who that key belongs to. And the secret key needs to be protected. So that is one type of keys that the HSM can protect. There's another type of key that an HSM protects. It's symmetric keys. So if you want to, for instance, encrypt something and you send it to a receiver, and you use symmetric cryptography, then these keys are really important to protect, because if someone learns those keys, they could decrypt the data that you're sending, or they can encrypt data and pretend to be a legitimate user of the system, perhaps your partner that you're dealing with. And so that is actually what HSMs are protecting. And they do that, and they store this data in a tamper-proof way. They are basically protected and encrypted even within that device. So nobody can actually get access to these keys.
Perfect. And you also talked about the nature of HSMs playing a critical role in accelerating the speed of cryptographic operations, which, together with the keys inside of an HSM, makes a lot of sense. Now, at least I would suspect, most of the listeners have heard about the threat of quantum computing and its, massive impact on the asymmetric or public key algorithms that the world has been using for many, many years now, decades. Could you just talk about how HSMs are going to play a role in the transition from classic or traditional cryptography to post-quantum cryptography?
Absolutely. No, this is one of the very hot topics. It's really one of the topics that is discussed across industries right now. And let me start by the first step here, which is very important. And it actually starts before we talk about the HSM itself. And that's also why we have this partnership, Ian. It is about the discovery of keys. You have to understand what cryptography you're using in order to understand your security posture of the company. And so that is something that is at the very beginning, understanding really what certificates, keys, algorithms you're using. The second thing is to rate, are they good? Are they fit for purpose? And then if you're at that stage, now you can actually decide what algorithms you want to use in the future. And this is where we come to the topic of PQC. So PQC is post-quantum cryptography. And that means this is an algorithm that would secure the communication when a quantum computer is powerful enough to break the crypto of today. So perhaps I take a little step back, Ian, and explain a little bit what this means. So quantum computers work very differently from traditional computers. So it's not just a 1 and 0, as we know that, but it's actually they can actually have multiple states at the same time. So I like to always explain this by a coin. So you take a coin, you spin this coin, and while this coin is spinning, you don't know if it will end up on head or tail. Only if you measure, so you actually put your finger on the coin, you will know if the head or the tail is up. And so that is actually one of the ways that quantum computers work differently from traditional computers. And so they can do a lot of things in parallel. That means some of the mathematical problems that we are using in today's cryptography can be broken once a quantum computer is powerful enough. And that is actually a real risk today, because just imagine we would exchange data, and I encrypt the data, I send it to you, it's going over the internet, and nobody can read it today because today's crypto is perfectly fine, right? I mean, there's no computer in the world that can break it. But if someone actually harvests the data, stores the data, and then waits to a later point where quantum computers are powerful at what we call Q day. So the Q day is the day where quantum computer would be that powerful. At that point, they can actually decrypt the data that I sent to you. Now, if I just send hello, it doesn't really matter. But if I send you some business values, right, and some IP of ours, then that is a different story, and it needs to be protected. And there's another aspect here, that aspect of digital signatures. So quantum computers could also potentially fake signatures in the future. And so that is something, when that day comes, you will probably have a lot of lawyers that will contest some of the existing contracts, because potentially they could have been done by a quantum computer rather by the person. And this is really something that is becoming a real risk for us. It is a bit similar to the Y2K problem. We knew it would be a specific day in the year. We don't know that for quantum computers, but it's similar because you can prepare yourself. And this is where I'm going back to the topic of PQC. PQC algorithms are existing today. They are existing on HSMs, and you can start using them, and you protect your enterprise also for the future.
Perfect. I like you touched on many things there that I think are really interesting. One of them is the use of cryptography for digital signatures. And I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts about the use of cryptography for identification, authentication, and the importance of that concept, in use in the digital age today. Because I think when people think about cryptography, a lot of people focus on encryption. And really, it's the authentication, the identification of people and machines that's of even much higher importance than encryption, in my opinion, anyway. So can you just talk about that for a minute?
Yes. Yeah, very happy to do that. Let's perhaps also try to take an example that could illustrate this a little bit. So just imagine you have a car that's driving on the street, and it's driving there for 15 years. And it has a lot of software nowadays. I mean, you see cars with like 3 screens in front of you, and everything is digital, sometimes even with touching the display. And of course, there's software behind that. And software can actually have errors, and those errors need to be corrected, or potentially some algorithms need to be updated over time. And so in order to do that, it is important to keep the software up to date. So how do you do that? You actually send a new software package over the air to the car. But the car, and now I'm coming to the topic of identities and proper verification of such software. When the software package arrives, the car needs to determine, for instance, the onboard unit, the ECU, whether this software package is a legitimate one and it's coming from the manufacturer or not from some attacker around the world. And that is actually where this plays a role. So it basically authenticates that software package. And that can be done, for instance, using digital signatures on the software itself. And it's one of the very early adopter in the business, I would say, for PQC, because if you look at the car industry as an example, but there's also other examples, for instance, satellites, they are flying in orbit and they will be flying there for the next decades to come, not for the next only months or years. And so all of them need to be protected today already against the threat of quantum computers being powerful to break today's cryptography. And they are the first to adopt for software signing the algorithms that we know in PQC.
That's great. So are those types of devices using HSMs in some form in their system with PQC today, or is that still in the future a bit?
You can say that it is an HSM. It's a little bit different from what we are providing. It's an onboard unit. It has secure memory as well, but it's much smaller. So it's not the HSM that we would provide for the backend processing. So our HSMs are basically used in the data centers or at specific machines. And that is actually where these HSMs are used that we provide. And then, of course, the car has something smaller. It just needs to verify that the signature is correct and that the software can be securely installed within the car.
The other topic that you mentioned a few minutes ago was Y2K, and that when people talk about Q-Day, I think it's very natural for people to think about Y2K as another major event in the history of IT. How would you compare Y2K versus Q-Day in terms of the scope and magnitude of impact?
I would say the impact that we could see is probably even bigger than the Y2K. So if the QA comes and we are not prepared, then all the data that have been encrypted before is basically lost or can be considered public domain. And of course, as well, the topic of signatures and signing documents, that's the same thing. So you basically invalidate the signatures that you may have on documents. And I can tell you a little bit the impact that might have to a big customer. So I was talking to a large bank, and normally you would say banks may not be the first to move on PQC because they have a transaction business. It relies on symmetric cryptography. It's reasonably secure. They understand that from their risk management systems very well. But sometimes we forget that banks also have, on the enterprise level, on the corporate side, a lot of processes that require digital signatures. They have regulatory mandates to keep this data secure for long-term archiving. They actually encrypt data as well, of course, for the customers, be it GDPR or other, because of other regulations. And they actually need to prepare themselves because this data actually has to be secure for longer than, say, the next 8 years or so. And just imagine what would happen if the Q-Day comes, the bank is not prepared, and suddenly the whole PKI, everything they have in place, is invalidated. This would actually be fatal in terms of consequences. The good thing is, as for the Y2K topic, you can prepare, even though you don't know what the exact date is. And what actually is discussed in the industry, and I like this question. It's more a question, really, and perhaps you can answer that for yourself as well, how you would see that. But just imagine, I mean, there's a debate. When is the Q-Day coming? Some say, yeah, perhaps it's rather 20 years or longer. Some say it's 10 years. But just imagine that let's take the year 2030. And in this year 2030, the likelihood of a quantum computer being powerful enough to break all the cryptography that we know, the traditional cryptographic schemes, is only 1%. Are you prepared to take that chance? Because our whole industry, our whole world, our communication, the security or the confidentiality of data, but also the authentication, everything relies on on today's cryptography, RSA, ECC, things that could be broken by a quantum computer. And I tell you, most people that I ask, they say, no, it's not acceptable. Even if the chance is only 1% that it happens in 2030, we actually have to prepare now because the consequences are so severe. And that is actually something that I really find telling. And you don't have to be a believer that it will be there with 50% probability to start preparing now.
Right. And I think the other point to go along with that is that if it was factually proven to be 1% in 2030, which is very hard to do, right? What we can know for sure from computing is that in 2031, it's not going to be 2%. Right, because of the exponentiality and the improvements that are made, it would go from 1% to probably 25% or something like that. So it's the nonlinear nature of computing is very important to take into consideration when you're thinking about things like how to deal with risk, and when to jump into something that's really important for protecting your risk.
Yes.
So that is a fantastic description that you just gave there. Beyond PQC, can you just give our audience some other good use cases of HSMs? What are some really cool uses that people use Utimaco for that wouldn't be obvious, for example?
Yeah, very happy to do that. Actually, we, as I said before, it's not only about hardware security modules and what is protecting you at the root, which you may not see and may not know as a user, that is actually what's protecting you. We actually play in different fields of really cool tech. If you look, for instance, at the topic of regulated cryptocurrencies, so I'm not talking about Bitcoin and I'm not talking about some of these coins that are existing today, but more about really currencies that are issued by the central bank. So the central bank needs a way to protect this digital currency when they issue that. And so it's one of the use cases where HSM come into the play. So you're using the methods, the principles of a blockchain, but you're not working in this consensus mode as you do perhaps today with Bitcoin. But you actually use HSMs to store key material that is basically protecting your whole ecosystem of this regulated cryptocurrency. And that is actually one of the interesting things that we do, where we use the HSM for. There's another one. It's a little bit more in the infancy. It's really trying how an HSM can complement confidential computing. So that is another very interesting one. So how do you protect data that is running in the cloud during the execution and shield it from any interference by other clients that are using that cloud? So that is another thing where HSMs could really complement the topic of confidential computing today. And then, of course, we also have HSMs in use today, for instance, to inject key material. It's another thing that is really important. You have a lot of machinery out there. Just imagine you have an airplane or you have a car. I mentioned the car earlier. So you have an onboard unit. You need to securely communicate with that car or with that airplane or with that machinery, the satellite. That's another example. And in order to do that, you need to actually securely provision key material in production to secure the whole life cycle of that car or that satellite or that airplane. And that's actually where also HSMs are used for. So we have a lot of very, very interesting use cases. And of course, also use cases that may not sound that spectacular, but in the end of the day, we have a lot of critical infrastructure to protect. And if you want to do that, then an HSM is automatically at the base of that, as the core part of the system. Perhaps one last example, Ian, because I also think that is the future. It's, again, a more early stage. We also engage, of course, in developing confidential cloud. So the possibility to have also cloud being used for government purposes. So the National Secure Cloud is an example of an initiative to really drive this topic forward and find a way that cloud technology can be used also in the very high security levels.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any other ways that you see HSMs evolving in the future?
Well, I think that HSMs will somewhat exist in how they are designed today. However, I think that they may actually exist as virtual HSMs, as software as well. That is something that would address medium security. Today we are really talking about the highest level of security. So I don't think that hardware would go away here. Hardware really helps protect in an appropriate way the security of the systems. But we will probably have a complementary arm of things where we have software HSM functionality. And then, of course, HSMs will exist in very different form factors. So the form factor may be miniaturized, and you will have some HSM-like functionalities, for instance, in a car or in a different setup. You may have blade technology. So there's all sorts of different form factors that may actually play a role in the future of HSMs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? As more and more things get miniaturized and more IoT devices get deployed in the world that are protecting, the front end of, let's say, critical infrastructure, there's just going to be an ever-growing need for not only HSMs as we've known them, but HSMs in new forms. Makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, for sure. You had mentioned a few minutes ago about the need for organizations to start the process of getting ready for post-quantum world, Q-Day. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you've seen in the market and in your customer base around interesting things, what companies might discover when they go to do an inventory of all their cryptography in use just today?
Yeah, absolutely. So our customers use a lot of these organizations that are out there to get a bit of better understanding on PQC, and also what that would mean for their business. You can, of course, the most prominent one is NIST, but we also have the local organizations like a BSI, like an ANSI in Germany or France. And also, of course, the industry organizations. Look at the GSMA, for instance, as being also involved in the discussion on PQC to give guidance to their members to do the right thing. And we just recently really had also guidance from NIST released that helps customers, and customers come with that guidance to us. So they have specified a number of use cases, and you can see and look at these use cases and say, okay, that's a use case that I have in the company that I need to protect. And they also put some timeline next to it. So there's a time in which you can test, and there's a time in which you should deploy it or consider deploying it. And then there's a time where there's an expectation that you're using post-quantum cryptography rather than traditional. I'd call it old. It's not really old. It's still protecting our society today, right? But the former, today's algorithms. So that is actually something customers look at. They also look at the algorithms available. So we have Dilithium, Kyber, so that our audience have heard the names. And of course, we have as well stateful hash-based algorithms for signatures like LMS and XMSS. They actually are very well understood, probably considered the most secure as we have them today. They come with certain challenges, but those two are also listed by NIST to be secure, to be used today. And then, of course, we also have symmetric cryptography like AES. That is also a standard that can be used instead of today's RSA or ECC algorithms. So that is actually what our customers look at. And when they look at it, then the next question, of course, is how do I start? And then our question is mostly, do you already know what you want to change? Do you understand your crypto posture? Do you know where your certificates are, which technologies you're using? Are you using RSA? Is symmetric cryptography an alternative? Or can you use a post-quantum algorithm? And that is actually where our partnership is so valuable, Ian. So that this is the starting point, right? And then once the customer has figured out what they want to do, then it's the point to use the HSM. You don't need to actually start with the hardware, but you can start with a simulator. We are offering on our website a free to download simulator that you can use, and you can just play around. You can actually get an understanding of an HSM, but also of PQC algorithms. And that is actually something that really helps your development teams to get familiar with that, doing the first proof of concept in the company, perhaps implement the first use case, and then really slowly starting to prepare yourself so that you can transfer your cryptography.
So that I really like that that Utimaco is doing that, because, and maybe you could spend a couple of minutes talking about it at a high level. What are the differences between the sort of traditional way that cryptography was done asymmetrically and these post-quantum algorithms? Not in mathematical detail, but just sort of conceptualization of the differences, if that's possible. I know it's not easy.
I mean, in the past, as I'd say, as a beginning, we have more or less relied on increasing the key size. So that was actually helpful for a long time. So we could increase the key size of RSA from 1024 to the next level. And that actually gave you extra security, and it was good for a long time. But this is somewhat coming to an end. So we need new mathematical fundamental problems that we have as underlying problems that are also secure against a quantum computer that can do so many parallel computations at the same time. And so that is actually where new mathematical problems come into the play. One is hash-based, so that are the algorithms like LMS and XMSS. And then there is another form that is called lattice-based, and that is another field of mathematical problems that can actually be stable or be secure against potential quantum computer attacks.
Okay. Super, thank you. I'm going to ask you one last technical question, because it's such a pleasure to listen to somebody explain these complicated concepts. Can you just explain to our audience why the asymmetric algorithms that we use today are at risk for quantum computing, but AES really isn't at risk? Can you just explain that quickly, and then we'll wrap up, because this has been great.
Absolutely. So we have actually. There's no quantum, or let's start a little bit differently. We don't have a quantum computer today to try. So this is a pure mathematical discussion, but we have algorithms that are proven to be working on a quantum computer once the quantum computer is available. There's an algorithm called the Shaw algorithm, and there's a Grover theorem that actually explains how a quantum computer could break RSA and in mere seconds. So that is actually something where even extending the key length doesn't protect you anymore in the future. You can think, I double the key length, but in the end of the day, it will not bring you anything. So essentially, RSA would be wiped off in terms of security. It would not provide you any security anymore. Now, the symmetric cryptography that we're using, I mean, that is kind of a random number, if you like. And looking or finding an algorithm that finds that random number faster, that is not anything that is so easy. So that is actually the theorem where that the key size that provides security today, say we take 256 bits, that key size would be halved in terms of the strength of the key. So if a quantum computer is existing, the quantum computer can do it in just half the time finding the key. That still gives you a good level of protection. So it would go from like 256 bits down to 128. So that is actually something that still provides enough protection for most use cases. So that is actually why symmetric cryptography still provides you a very good level of protection, while RSA, really, this asymmetric cryptography as we know today, is broken.
Right, and 128 bits of strength is millions of years of protection, right? I mean, exactly. It's beyond our imagination of how strong it is. You talked very quickly about the algorithms that were created by people years ago, decades ago, and to me that's just fascinating. You know, that years ago, when quantum computing was just a dream, an imaginary concept, that people could actually figure out how that imaginary concept could be used to break algorithms that we've built the digital age around. You know, it's an amazing capability that those people had, and you know, we should be thankful that they put the effort in years ago, because it's given us the time to recognize that, hey, we need to make these changes. We need new algorithms. We need to start the process very, very soon.
I think there's one thing, Ian, that is important to mention here, also as a term and where we work towards, is the topic of crypto agility. And you were just bringing it up. A long time ago, mathematicians sat down and they found ways to really increase the speed how a quantum computer could break cryptography. They did this all on paper. So we had a lot of smart people that found this already on paper. Now, just imagine we have a quantum computer to play around. So there may be other ways to attack cryptography. And that brings us to a fundamental challenge we face in the future. I told you before, extending the key length of RSA was a great thing. It gave you security throughout the last probably 20 years, right? But now going forward, there is a possibility that some of the algorithms that we actually deem secure for post-quantum cryptography may actually not be secure, and there may be ways to attack those that we find later. So now we need to prepare ourselves for that. We need to prepare that crypto algorithms are changing much more frequently in the future, and that they are much more specific to an application. So whether you have IoT or corporate PKI, or if you are encrypting data, so there's always advantages and disadvantages of these different algorithms. So this is actually one of the things that we have to bear in mind. And that brings us to the topic of crypto agility. The goal that we don't have to change anything in the software that we're using, the business software, really only in the underlying systems, for instance, in the HSM or in the middle layer between the application and the HSM, so that we can actually continue using that application. The application will not notice that there's a different crypto algorithm, a new one, a more secure one underneath, and we'll just use that. And that's crypto agility, putting a new algorithm in, removing the old one, and the system will not notice that. That is actually one really big goal to achieve going forward, that we actually go towards crypto agility.
Yeah, super important goal, because the history of cryptography is a very interesting history, but the reality is there's been very few asymmetric algorithms that were needed over the last 30 years. And therefore, it's been extremely static. And what you just pointed out, which I 100% agree with, is the future of cryptography is going to be very dynamic. And we need to be ready for that. And that means our software systems and our hardware systems need to be evolved to be agile and ready to be able to be changed without having to go touch the satellite, because that's just not feasible.
Yes.
Be able to go and change the cryptography in the satellite without touching the satellite or any other software-based system. Thank you so much. That was a great explanation of crypto agility, something obviously that is near and dear to both InfoSec Global and Utimaco, a topic that's very important to both of us. This has been amazing. I think we could continue this conversation for probably a couple of hours. So maybe we'll have to invite you back for another one of these Crypto Insights sessions. So thank you so much. We touched basically the fundamentals of HSMs, why they're so important in providing a root of trust, the need for HSMs even more so in the future for acceleration of cryptography, but the need to handle even more and diverse types of keys in the future, because we need to make sure we can continue to do things like authentication, digital signature of code that's going to run a car or a satellite or whatever. Touched on the difference between really like Y2K and what was going on there and what's going to happen with Q-Day, and all the way to the need for crypto agility, which was fantastic. Thank you so much, Nils. And thanks to everybody for listening to what has been, in my opinion, a great explanation, not only of HSMs, but the whole transition that we need to do towards post-quantum cryptography to get ready for the digital age in a post-quantum world. Thank you again, Nils. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Ian. Looking forward to that too.
Okay, thank you.